Out. Good boy. Okay, yeah. I know. In school, I always liked human psychology. I remember there was, I think, like, here we took a semester of social psychology, and I was fascinated at human behavior. There was just something about it that clicked with me. I played golf professionally for 8 years, never made it to the big time, but saw a lot of places. Lo and behold, there's an episode of The Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan, and he was cornering this German Shepherd in an alley that was baring its teeth at him. And both my dad and I looked at each other like, this guy's nuts. But there was something about, like, it was a different way of being with dogs. And at that point, I learned that there was a psychology behind it. And I kind of came full circle again, thinking, wow, there's another way that I can study psychology, just maybe in the dog world compared to the human world.
What's up, everybody? This is Simon. On this episode of The Ideal Hour, I have Ian Grant, the Vermont dog trainer. He's very popular on Instagram. He talks about dog hierarchy, where they pee on hydrants, means something, and so forth. And we're going to really get into dog training and a little bit about Ian. Ian, thanks for coming on The Ideal Hour.
Thanks, Simon. I'm honored to be on here with you.
Oh, I appreciate you more than you know. All right, so let's talk about this because I've had dogs in my life. My wife is I would say, a dog lover until she has to clean up the poop, you know?
Yeah.
So she would, I would do all those tasks. But, dogs have a big place in a lot of people's heart. They're like kids. And what led you to be a dog trainer, and how did you grow this whole thing?
In school, I always liked human psychology. I remember there was, I think, like, here we took a semester of social psychology, and I was fascinated at human behavior. There was just something about it that clicked with me. I was not a good reader, however, and psychology and reading, I knew there was going to be a lot of it, and so I never really pursued it. And it was, I struggled in college, and I was going to be an elementary school teacher, and it just wasn't, I was one of those lost souls where it was not going in the right direction for me. And so at the time, I moved back home, got a job in a hotel. I did the whole hospitality thing and whatnot, bellman valet, greeting people, which I truly enjoyed. But, when that time came to, it ran its course. I was struggling mentally as, like, here I was probably in my early 20s. A lot of my friends were in college or graduating from college, and here I am, no college degree and such. And my mom asked me what makes you happy. At that time, it was playing golf. And so I took my shot. I played golf professionally for 8 years, never made it to the big time, but saw a lot of places. I really like to think that those times kind of polished me for who I am today, as far as working at private clubs, dealing with the public and that kind of thing. And so towards the end of my career, I was home for the holidays, and my father was flipping through the channels, and lo and behold, there's an episode of The Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan, and he was cornering this German Shepherd in an alley that was baring its teeth at him. And both my dad and I looked at each other like, this guy's nuts. But there was something about, like, it was a different way of being with dogs. And at that point, I learned that there was a psychology behind it. And I kind of came full circle again, thinking, wow, there's another way that I can study psychology, just maybe in the dog world compared to the human world. And so that was the holidays of, like, the 2004, 2005, and I haven't turned around since. I've been knee deep, head deep into it, and loving every minute of it ever since.
That's wonderful. So a few questions come to mind from that. One is, professional golfer is very interesting. A lot of parents try to get their kids into it. It's a big payout on the high level of scale.
Yep.
But in reality, how difficult is it to become a professional golfer? And two, what are the crowds like? Because I would find them to be a little bit arrogant or pompous.
Yeah, I remember it was kind of crazy. It was just literally me registering for this mini tour, if you will, at the time, just circling, are you professional? Yes or no. I circled yes. I was officially a professional. And I was like, really? It's that easy? Like, I'm thinking there's legal paperwork, that's 3 inches thick that I got to go through. I'm going to sign my life away, the whole thing. I just had to circle yes. And I was like, wow, okay. Well, that was way too easy. And so a lot of these, just trying to get my feet wet. So a lot of these tournaments were only like 60 or $75 to get into.
Oh,
And
wow.
you might win maybe a couple of hundred. But I remember my first check that I ever made, and it was only $60, but I made my money back for the tournament. And it was like, that was a really big deal. It was like, I actually made money legit, not like a gift certificate in a pro shop kind of thing, but it was legit money. And so it was like, wow, it's pretty cool. The guys at the time, the ones that I started to create relationships with, I mean, I wouldn't even say like a friendship. You just see them a lot at all these tournaments. Some guys you really enjoyed playing with, other guys you're just like, ugh, 18 holes with this person. And I'm sure somebody felt that same way about me too. It all goes full circle. So, but as the time wore on, guys coming out onto those mini tours, and I played a lot of state opens and stuff, they're getting younger and younger and younger, and they're starting to drive the ball way past me.
Yeah.
I'm starting to not.
Other time hit you.
Yeah. I remember that I can remember I was playing with this one guy. His name was Ted Potter Jr., lefty. I'm a lefty as well. And we were paired in the same group, and he hit it was like this 200-yard shot with a 5-iron, and he threw it, and it landed like a dart on the green. And the way the ball sounded when he hit it, at that moment, I was like, I think I'm done. Yeah, it was just like, wow, it was just different. Cool part is, about 4 years later, I think he won his first PGA Tour event. So it was really cool to see that, of like, that's where I would have needed to be to 4 years from there play on tour, so it was this huge jump. But one thing about it, I remember when I first wanted to do it, I was like, I don't want to turn around, have a family, and wished I'd taken my shot and never did. I was single as can be during that time, so it was like, why not now? I'm not going to have any regrets. I got to play some awesome courses, played some Open Championship courses over in England and Scotland, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. It polished me for what I do today, for sure.
So when you travel, do you still play golf, or is it kind of one of those bitter things where you're like, I'm not gonna suit up right now?
I have to tell you, Simon, and this is like from a casual standpoint. I go on a golf trip with one of my cousins and my brother every year.
Yeah.
It screws with my head knowing what I used to be able to do with the ball compared to now. But like, I could see the shot clear as day with like my old brain of how I wanted to hit it. And my brain, as soon as I hit it now, it's just like, oh, that's not even close. So it's hard to accept it and not fight where you have been or could be or whatever. So that was it. There was a couple of really ugly rounds with a lot of swear words that I had before I finally realized, like, this is who I am now. This is the player that I am, and I have to accept it.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to accept the fact that you're now a hobbyist.
Yeah.
With someone that now you're circling the no box on the professional.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's talk about Cesar Millan. When I was young, I watched his, his methods of calming a dog down. And was that guy the real deal? Is he like a real deal dog trainer, or was it all show on TV?
No, it's real deal, and so just to give some transparency here too. So I actually now work for him.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. So from 2004 until I attended one of his workshops in 2014 as I was growing my business. So I saw him in person. I saw everything fully unedited in person, and you're just like, how did he just do that with that dog? It's just a leash. There's no magic wand. There's no editing for television in real life. And so eventually I got the invite to kind of work on the staff during his workshops to kind of help set up staging stuff, move dogs in and out for the students and everything. And so it's now turned into being a coordinator. So now I'm kind of the coordinator for about 10 people of that staff that do a lot of the moving and around and such. And so I've been very fortunate to spend a good amount of time at the Dog Psychology Center. And again, to see him work in person it's just phenomenal because he sees things that we don't see. And even, his head trainer and other trainers go, what did you see there? And so it's for real. I would, I would ask people too, like, obviously we all see him on TV. If you ever get the chance to see him in person, that's when it hits, when you are like, there is something here that we just can't tangibly see. There's nothing special that he's doing with the leash. It's his energy. It's how he communicates. So it's fascinating, and it's truly that's the dog psychology stuff to the core that to this day I'm still fascinated with.
That's awesome. So 2 points or to your point. So he created a good business that actually expanded. He's not the sole dog trainer, which is great. And it became almost a big company. And then at the same time, it sounds like he's a person that really has great energy. When you talk to him, does he, as a person talking to him, is he still able to control like the narrative of flow of energy? Can he calm you down? Do you feel riled up? Does it,
Yeah. I have to say, in some ways, it's creepy because you feel like when you're in front of him, you feel like he's looking right through you and he can see into your soul and he knows exactly what you're going through. There's something about it. I remember there was one of the workshops. One of the trainers had shown up, to work as normal, and the trainer didn't even say hi yet. And Cesar went, "What's going on?" Like he knew just from how he was walking and how he looked that there was something, and they went, I don't know what it was, but they just went off and kind of had their conversation. But that's the kind of guy of who he is. And the cool part about working his workshops is that at some point you're probably going to get a little one-on-one time with him. Just it's never scheduled, but it's just like it works out. You might get 2 minutes, you might get 5 minutes, whatever. And I was actually I still do some podcasting, but so I did a podcast where I interviewed a dog trainer from every state. And then when that was done, I kept going and just kind of kept, re-interviewing trainers and such. Well, it was a double-edged sword because it was great for my listeners, but for me personally, I was taking in all these trainers' information. I'd finish the podcast and I'd go, "Ooh, I want to go try that." And so it shifted my mindset from staying true to who I am to now just trying all these different things. And so my old golf coach used to call it paralysis through analysis, right? I think most people have heard that. And so I remember talking to Cesar. I had my moment there with him, and I was like, sometimes I really I get too into my head as far as what I should do with each dog and everything. And, I get paralyzed. I don't know what to do. And I'm trying to stay instinctual. And he fired back with this phrase that hit me like a ton of bricks. And he said, you're just not grateful enough. And I was like, whoa. And I was like, what do you mean I'm not grateful? Like, well, and he said, you're not being instinctual to yourself. You're not being to who you are. You're not appreciating everything that you have. You're fishing, and that fishing kind of created this paralysis in my head. And I was like, okay. And so at that point, I stopped interviewing dog trainers because I was like, I have to get back to who I am and then go from there. And I'm in a very, very good place mentally with my business and how I work with dogs now.
Interestingly, you said that. It's almost, I'm reading a book about overthinking. Overthinking is the same thing. It's basically what you said leads to paralysis. You can't make a decision, or you feel like what you're doing is not enough. And now with comparisons out there with social media and everything else, that can totally block you from being great. I think it's like you're so focused on what someone else is doing or maybe doing or not doing. You're really not being yourself. And that's great that he brought that back with you. Let's talk a little bit about dogs. There's the loud dogs, there's the big dogs, there's some common traits you see in dogs that are maybe misbehaving. And how do you suggest someone approaches it? And obviously the spectrum is wild, but
Sure.
What are some of the common things you see owners kind of let their dogs get away with that they come to you for help?
I think the biggest for me is overexcitement. I think people translate or interpret that In order for a dog to be happy, they need to be vibrating, they need to be moving quickly, they need to be panting or barking, or they just need to be going, 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 going. And I think there is a time for that, right? That's the first thing that I want everybody to understand. There's a time to play. There's a time to go cut loose with your dog and all that. There's also a time where we just have to kind of chill for a little bit, and now is not the time. And I don't feel like people define that enough for their dogs. I think it's typically let's just go, 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 go. But, you know, when your mother-in-law comes over who's 75 years old, who has thin skin and is not stable, and your dog is bouncing off the walls because they're so excited, well, you kind of have a recipe for disaster. And I think that to me is teaching your dog what your expectations are. And I think too many people get stuck in the constantly saying no to their dog, which is exhausting. That brings the frustration out in us. Then our emotions kick in and we start to overpower our dogs, and that hurts our relationship. This is just it's a snowball effect. So I always tell people think direction more than correction to start with. Like, what do you want your dog to do in this scenario? But we get stuck in the just saying no all the time. So for me, it's an overexcitement, talking too much. Let's just kind of bring things down a notch. I'll still show you how to play with your dog because there has to be that balance. But I want the owners to understand, like, let's figure out how your dog thinks. Let me kind of shed a little light on this, and then let's work from there.
I love that. What's one way to calm a dog from being overexcited? I mean, I watched Cesar do and that
Yeah,
I'm sure there's like levels to all of that, but
totally.
it worked on TV when I watched it. What do you
Yeah.
recommend, or what's the way to calm a dog down in case they do have an elderly nearby, or you want it to not bark, the baby's sleeping?
Yeah, first things first, we have to restrict the dog's space that they're in. And so that can be as simple as putting your dog on leash. But when I say put your dog on leash, a lot of times people put their dog on leash and they let them pull out to the end of the 6 feet, in one direction, and then to the left, and then behind them, in front of them. So yeah, you're restricting the space, but you're still allowing the dog to get to the end of the leash and whatnot. So I always tell them, put your dog on a short leash, make it as short as possible, and then put about an inch of slack in it. I want the dog just pick a side, and again, I don't care what side the dog is on, and put them into a sit. If they get up, put them back into a sit. If they get up, put them back into a sit, right? It becomes this pattern. And so because the dog is in this motion or in this environment, because the dog is in this pattern of constantly moving forward and excitement, once you throw a wrench in the gears, you're going to get a number of reactions back depending on the dog. So they could fight the leash. They could try to climb up you because they're protesting. They could bark. And so for me, I always tell clients, like, whatever reaction your dog is going to give you, it's actually not sustainable. They can't do that for hours. Typically, they're not going to do it for even a half an hour. So I know that if I'm going to do something with a dog, and if I know that if I invest fully 20 minutes into it, there's a good chance I'm going to get there. There's already light at the end of the tunnel. But I think awareness, and I think, Simon, this is really key. When we have a dog that misbehaves, and let's say we're out in public, if we have a dog that misbehaves and barks, I think it thrusts us as the owners into a complete present state of mind. And we're not typically in a present state of mind as humans, right? We're always thinking tomorrow, yesterday, tonight, what happened a couple of hours ago. And I also don't think we're used to knowing how to react in that present state of mind, too, where we tend to panic. Everybody moves really quickly when things are happening, like in the moment. And that just adds fuel to the fire to the dog. So for me, I always tell people, like, this isn't going to last. We just have to weather this storm. Let's just be chill during this time, because we have to be chill in order to influence our dogs. So let's work through this. We're going to get there. This is what it's going to look like. And once we get there, we can celebrate under our breath because we have to calm the dog down. But you're going to see that it's possible. And then, then we can build from there.
So interesting, the connection of psychology between animals, or dogs in this case, and humans. It's what you kind of said. It mentions or reminds me of like a crying baby on an airplane. There are people that are freaking out that their baby is crying.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that are like, well, this is what this is, and
Yep.
through it, right?
Yep.
I'll do my best to control it. So very interesting. What do dogs recognize, like with humans, for example? I can walk into a room and I could say, this is an alpha guy. Like he's a guy that's gonna, if I tell him something in this way, he's gonna come back at me or say he looks like a tough guy. He's an alpha dog, alpha guy.
Hmm.
Do dogs recognize alphas in the house? Do they think they're the alpha originally? In some cases, maybe the male dogs, so to speak. Or do they recognize who the leader is? Like with Cesar Millan, for example, the dogs knew who was in charge for some reason
Right.
within the episode.
Yep.
What are you seeing when you're training animals or just overall?
Well, I can tell you this. I've been doing this I'm in my 18th year. I feel like the true, I'm talking true to the core, to the heart, dominant dog. I think for me, I've seen less than five. I think that term gets thrown out and misdiagnosed to many dogs. And then when that happens, we actually create it with that dog. If the dog barks at the mailman and somebody who isn't aware a lot about dogs, they go, well, it's just being dominant. Well, guess what? If we're not doing anything about it, that dog learns that all that big display just gets it what he or she wants. And then it starts to use it in other areas of its life, and pretty soon now it's just controlling everything around it. There are other dogs that do this. They may put up this big display, but they don't want to, and they don't have the qualifications for it. The dogs that don't have the qualifications for it are the ones that start to manifest the really odd, strange behaviors. They may chase their tail. They may chew on the couch. They may, bark at a stranger but back up. They're not comfortable with being in those certain settings in those certain situations. And so I remember walking into a home and there was this, I don't know, he's probably a 150-pound mastiff, and he just walked up to me, like sauntered, didn't rush, nothing. This is one of the ones that I felt was like one of those dogs. And he just put his nose into my leg and just like held it there. And I was like, oh, this is very different. I've never had a dog like greet me that way. That's the only time that's ever happened. But that dog had bitten one of their kids in the face, had to have dental work. Like the mother and father were completely in different opinions of how the dog should be treated. So now there's chaos and confusion in the house. There's lack of rules and boundaries, right? So all this stuff, and it creates this dog that can be this like powder keg. So for me, I think oftentimes, how dogs carry themselves is a part of it, but also whatever they practice, they get really good at it. Like if I just practice hitting a golf shot with a 5-iron all day, every day, I'm probably going to get really good at it. But if I eat a Big Mac at every meal, I'm going to get good at that. And there's going to be some repercussions to it too. So I think understanding the dog and who you have in front of you and the environment is key. But, the dominant and alpha term, I would want people to learn a little bit more about understanding, what that truly is. There's a dominant dog out of every litter that's, that might be higher than each one in the litter, but that doesn't mean that every scenario that dog goes into, it's going to be dominant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's not like a lion pack almost, where
Right.
the lion is not controlling everything.
Right. Like there may be 4 kids born in a family, and one of them is the one that's kind of the head honcho, but that doesn't mean that he can run Microsoft and be the number one person there. So I think it's good to understand that context.
To your point, it sounds, I mentioned earlier that dogs are like kids, and it sounds like in this family environment that you were bringing up, there's a correlation between chaos in the home and the way the dog acts, the same way there's correlation with chaos in the home and children misbehaving under stress, right? Because it sounded like a dog that's not ready to bark or act the way it's not supposed to, it actually gets stressed out.
Yeah.
And then acts differently, maybe self-harming or maybe acting out and so forth. So, very interesting. I'm learning a lot, and it sounds like dogs are children. Is what it really comes.
There's so many analogies to it too, because just like I said, how I'm going to teach a client that they can still play with their dog, but we need structure. Well, it's classroom and recess for elementary school kids, right? That's the same thing. And so I always tell people like we don't send 8-year-olds to college because they're not ready. They're not ready socially, educationally, environmentally. Some of them may make it, and it may not be pretty, right? And others are just not going to be able to survive. And too often, we give our dogs too much freedom too soon, and they can't handle that freedom. Like the 8-year-old can't handle going to college. So we honestly set the dogs up for failure, and then we're in constant recovery mode. So it's when we go through a range of emotions doing all of it.
When is a good time to start teaching etiquette to the dog or rule sets? At what month, age?
I can tell you just before us recording this, I was at a client's house. They have a 3-month-old dog. And so I'm already in the house. The dog's 12 weeks old. They've probably had it for a month, I think. And so I love to play with dogs at that age. Who doesn't want to play with a puppy, right? Like, oh my
That's
gosh, they're just
it's
totally. Yes, absolutely. Their teeth are sharp, but everything else is really good. And so we just talked about play, talked about structure. The wife, I told her today, she's doing something that no other client of mine of a puppy that age has ever done. She had basically a notepad of when the dog was being taken out and if the dog went to the bathroom or not. She already had a log, a journal of like everything. And I was like, good for you. I wish more people would do that because if you're not keeping track of your puppy in the house, it's too much freedom too soon. It's the 8-year-old at college. It's not going to be good. So she was ahead of the game, and I like praised her up and down. It was amazing.
That's good. It sounds like that dog is going to be a gifted dog, similar
Very
like.
well could be.
Let me ask you a question. Pit bulls and some of these other, Dogo Argentino, some of these dogs that are known to fight lions back in the days and so forth, these dogs, are they the product of also the environment, or are they naturally aggressive dogs where that's in their nature? Because, insurances, for example, you buy a house, you get insurance, whatever. They're like, do you have a pit bull or you rent an apartment?
Yeah.
They're worried about
Yeah.
it.
I have a lab mix. I don't have a pit bull.
Yeah, exactly. You get around and like, oh my God, can I live here, please?
Yeah.
But what do you see? Is it the product of the person, or is it, or are those naturally animals that are a little bit more wary and the insurance companies are accurate?
Yeah, I think first things first, we can never disregard genetics, right? So if a dog has come from a mother and father with, massive aggression tendencies, and then we gotta, but that can be any breed too, Simon, right? That can be a Chihuahua, it can be a poodle, it can be whatever. So there's always the genetic aspect. Second is, let's just face it, they're a lot of dog, right? Those big, strong breeds are a lot of dog. And when we get dogs like that, typically what's happening is they're not being fulfilled. They're not being fulfilled, mentally, physically. They're being pent up. They don't get out of the house. They don't go for walks for months at a time. They're given freedom, too much freedom as well. And so that to me, because it's such a big, strong dog that can do so much damage, that's like the big flashing neon billboard to everybody. The big dogo dogs that are massive, right? Like they're huge, they're strong, they look like brutes. The end of the day, they still work the same in the brain as the little teacup chihuahua that you can hold in your hand. But that one's not going to rip toes off and your foot off, and there's some bad things that happen with those big strong dogs. But when you can have crystal clear expectations of your dog, when you can provide everything that you need to mentally, physically for them, they're going to be some of the most loyal dogs that you'll ever come across. And to me, when I see a big strong dog that is cool with people, cool with dogs, cool with kids, can greet you, and also doesn't use their physical overwhelming presence to get into your space, that to me is just like, it's icing on the cake. When that dog fully understands what the expectations are, it's so cool to see that out of big dogs. But oftentimes we get big dogs and people like to get leaned on. They like it when they push into them. They like it when they sit with them at the counter, the kitchen counter, up on stools and dining room tables on their chairs and whatnot. And we give them too much. And just like what I said before, if they don't have the qualifications, we're going to see, terrible behaviors come out and manifest themselves in different ways.
To your point, it sounds like all dogs are kind of have the same brain, and obviously there's genetics, but the dogs with mass and strength, you have to be more cautious of. It's
Yeah.
maybe a bigger liability in terms of if something does go wrong, they have the power, so to speak, to really make it wrong. Because a Chihuahua bites you, you're like, okay, get off, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think too when it comes down to it, there's a group of owners that have these big strong dogs are doing amazing. The other end of the spectrum is there's a group of people that own these dogs, and those people are doing bad things anyways, right? Drugs, whatever, and it's just not a good scene. You have everything else in between. And so I've come across many people in my time who they want their pit bull to be like the pit bull that is seen out in public, to be proven that their dog is a good dog. And guess what? That dog doesn't usually turn out to be a good dog. Sorry about that. And that dog doesn't turn out to be a good dog because that dog has been given everything. Here's all your freedom. You're going to be the poster child for pit bulls. And it just doesn't work out that way.
The poster child for pit bulls. I love it. Let's talk about Chihuahuas. Is there a reason why those dogs tend to bark more? Like, are they generally stressed out a lot because of their size, or is it the Napoleon kind of syndrome of dogs?
Yeah, well, so if you look into the history of Chihuahuas, you'll see that they're actually bred to guard chickens. And
Oh,
so they are truly the alarm dog, right?
okay.
So to let everybody know around them, like there's a threat that's going on around here. So here's the other thing too, is anytime you have a purebred dog, you have that 100% drive of that breed. It's full on. And so when that doesn't get, and I'm not saying for people to own Chihuahuas, you have to get a flock of chickens and, fulfill them that way. I'm saying you better exhaust that energy elsewhere, physically and mentally, to kind of redirect the energy somewhere else so that they're not as stressed, they're not as wound. One of the very first clients that I ever had when I was still getting my feet wet was a Chihuahua who really wouldn't come out of the crate. Like their owners had oven mitts on, like it was chomping at him as they're trying to reach into the crate. I mean, this dog was a mess at the time. I only got him as far as I could, and I referred him on to somebody with more experience than me at that time, way back. But they're wound. And I remember I had a trainer one time that I was talking to, and he said, never get a working dog and don't work it. And I thought that was brilliant because when you get a purebred dog, you're truly getting a working dog. They're bred for something. And so we have to do something with that dog to satisfy that dog, mentally and physically to be successful.
That's smart. Very interesting. Yeah, I completely agree. If you got a dog that loves running or was like a bird hunting dog, it needs to really run that out and find something, right? It's
Yeah.
interesting.
I mean, think about a guy that could work for NASA or SpaceX and could put a rocket together with no problem whatsoever, but he's working at McDonald's and his only job is to use a spatula and flip a burger over, and that's it. Like that dude's gonna rewire the microwave, the oven, like he's gonna try to
Yeah,
find stuff to do, and it's probably not gonna be good.
it's gonna create a robot to flip the burger.
Yeah, totally.
With funny enough, with Chihuahuas having chased chickens, it's probably not a bad idea to have a farm nowadays of chickens with the egg prices going through.
Totally, right? Very true.
So maybe supplement that way and be
Yeah,
profitable.
we could work hand in hand.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about new dog owners. What are some of the tips? You got parents out there, their kids want dogs and they want to please their kids and so forth. But
Yeah.
new dog owners, what are some of the basic tips you give to someone that maybe never had a dog before?
It's interesting. I've had two of these people in the last 2 weeks, and there's something. I mean, I love dog owners, responsible dog owners, but there's something when I go into somebody's house and they're like, "We've never owned a dog," and I'm like, "Oh, this is amazing!" Like, I don't have to undo the years of like bad, knowledge or whatever the case may be. It's a clean slate, which is, it's amazing because you can kind of like build and shape and mold. So to me, first things first, everybody in the home should be in agreement that they're getting a new dog. The whole surprise dogs for the holidays, for birthdays, I don't think it's a huge idea. Second thing is, if your kid is probably 15 or under, I don't think we can put responsibility on the kids to take care of the dog. I don't take care. I mean, what is that? Like, are we just talking feeding? Are we talking walking and grooming? There's so many things. So I think we put too much responsibility on kids. So this has to be truly a spouses and partners are in this together kind of thing moving forward. Second thing is, if you're getting a puppy, you got to know that you're going to be putting in a ton of work in the beginning. I think it's easier to get dogs these days than probably it ever has been because there's so many more people working from home. Pre-COVID, I was always working with people that were never at home, and now there's usually at least one person. So that's a benefit to raising a dog. But I think, for somebody getting a dog, I think teaching them that there has to be a structure, there has to be a routine. The first 90 days of owning a dog is hugely important. That's the dog's time to understand this is where I live, this is the routine, these are the people that I live with, this is what I can expect, and these are the rules and the boundaries that I have to live by. And people think rules and boundaries are such a bad term that it means that we can't let our dogs do anything or have anything, when in all reality, like, structure creates so much clarity for us humans, let alone dogs. I mean, that's why there's a yellow line in the middle of the road and there's white lines on the sides of the road. It makes it clear for us so we know what to expect. No lines, no. Right, they totally do, totally. But I want people to make things clear for the dog. Show them what you want. Create the patterns that you want, and I think you would save yourself a huge headache by just starting day one with all that.
I love that. It's almost like starting a business. Have a plan in mind and see who the pieces are, what they're responsible for, because the Christmas Day dog is could be a disaster.
Yes, and it typically is.
And what's sad is when people do it that way, I feel like it also puts the dog in a bad position because then they have to give the dog away. Potentially, they thought it's too much work. They didn't really plan this out.
Yeah, the holiday dog, it's usually, the kennels and shelters are great because they're somewhat empty at the end of the year and the beginning of the year. And then February hits or March, and then they all start to come back again just because it wasn't planned on, let alone being, if you're in California, you can get outside in December and January, no problem. In Vermont, you're not getting out a lot with the snow, the temperatures and that kind of thing, which means your dog's pent up. You might be pent up. And it's just, we're not heading in a good direction to start with.
You're hibernating. Yeah, that's interesting. A few points there. It's like, one, it's like a bad golf swing. A new owner doesn't have the swing, so you're just teaching them the proper form.
Yep.
And in as far as getting a dog, the business plan is important. And it's kind of like the gym, right? People sign up for New Year's resolution,
Yep.
and then it comes January, February, they're like, yeah, I'm not doing this. I'm going to cancel.
Yep.
So interesting. All right. What about, shelters, adopting a dog versus buying a new dog? What are some advantages, disadvantages? I know people love to adopt because I think they euthanize the dogs that don't get adopted, from what I understand. So I can see the big bonus in there. But are people that are adopting, is there something they should be wary of? I mean, are they adopting? I'm not going to say all dogs are problematic, but is there, bad behavior, and can that bad behavior be, fixed, so to speak?
Yeah, I think, if you're looking at getting a puppy, there's a lot of work in the beginning. There's the house training piece of it. There's the puppy mouthing, and there's a lot of those behaviors. When you go and rescue, let's say, a 1-year-old dog from a shelter, there's a good chance you're out of the puppy stage and you're into the more of the adolescent stage and whatnot. I think, the dog that you adopt, when you walk up and down the aisles in the shelter, typically everybody wants to get the dog that is up against the front of the kennel, up on its back feet, panting, the tail's wagging. You're going, oh my gosh, this is great, right? He's so happy to see me. He picked me. Yeah, he picked me. And I go, great. That's the way you're going to start your relationship, is the person that picked you is the one you're going to spend the rest of your life with. In the human world, that makes no sense, right? Zero sense. That girl from the bar just came over and picked me. Oh, I'm going to live with her for the rest of my life. This is the perfect match, you
Yeah.
know. So I always tell people I want you to look at the dog that's not at the door, the gate of the kennel, and I don't want you to get the dog that's at the back. I want the one that's in the middle, literally physically in the middle, that's just kind of looking at you on the softer side of just like, hey, how's it going, guys? Right? What are you guys up to? That's the one that I want people to gravitate towards because that's typically the one that people can, they're the most compatible with. If you're in a home and you work from home and you're not an outdoorsy kind of person and you're getting that dog that's jumping all over the gate at the kennel, that dog needs to go. It needs to be active. And if you're not active, well, then we're not compatible. And so I don't think people consider compatibility that much. I think people just look at, we're going to get a dog and the dog's going to bring a lot of joy into our life. But what are we going to do for that dog? We have to do more than just give it a different place to live and love it. I mean, I've never questioned anybody's love for a dog, but I do question why they got the dog.
Compatibility.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
mean, it's very seldom that the first boy or girl that you ever date, probably in fifth or sixth or seventh grade, that you actually end up marrying them and living together forever. You know, because you have to learn what works for you and what doesn't. And so compatibility is a big deal. And I think once you understand who you are, what your family's like, super active, not super active, then you get the dog according to that. And I think that's a much better match and a much better way to start off their life together rather than, you know, the super active people with a dog in the back of the kennel that's scared of everything and vice versa. So always go for the middle is my advice to people.
If you like to run in the morning 10 miles, maybe that dog in the front is a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I get it. Totally accurate. What about, let's talk a little bit about dog anxiety. I think a lot of dogs have anxiety nowadays. And I've even seen CBD things for dogs popping up. I mean, the dog business and the animal business is a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar business. Including dog hotels, which I realize is like one of the biggest businesses growing nowadays.
Yeah.
And you probably should just open up a bunch yourself. But let's talk about dog anxiety. What are some of the tips to just cool down the dog, or how would you deal with it? Is it medication? Is it certain type of dieting? What would you give someone as advice with that possibly?
I've walked into plenty of homes and seen an anxious dog there. And to me, it's almost like a cry for help that they're not getting what they need. And so obviously anxiety can, it's because there could be numerous reasons. Typically, it's lack of exercise of some sort. But I always tell people we have to be careful because sometimes anxiety can be diagnosed as high energy. And so then we run with that dog, 4 miles a day, 4 days a week. Well, guess what? You're also building stamina and you're creating an athlete. So next year, you're going to have to increase that. So, there's only with that anxious mind, yes, the exercise is good. But I will tell you this to kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier. Dogs that don't have the qualifications to handle things in their environment, they get anxious because they don't know what to expect and they can't handle those situations. And one of those situations might be just you have a friend coming over that's going to knock at the door and the dog goes, oh, crap, there's somebody else here again. I can't handle this. So they're going to go and hide, or they may spin, or they may pant heavily. They may shake or tremble. But I will tell you, the majority of the dogs that I see with anxiety, once you start to give them some direction as to what you want from them, it starts to kind of fade away slowly. With a barking dog, once you teach them not to bark, they become quiet. It's not a flip of the switch, but that can happen quicker than a dog that was previously anxious to now not, right? Because it's such a mental health thing. The crazy part to me is, and I always ask people, like I've walked into a home and just the dog will just do laps around the couch, right? And it looks at me like, as it goes by one corner, it kind of looks at me and then goes around the couch, comes back and looks at me. And I was like, if I came in and I did this, would you stop me? And they go, well, yeah. And I'm like, so why aren't you stopping this now? This is a mental health thing. So if I look at this and I go to a client, would you help a friend doing this? Absolutely. Isn't this truly one of your friends? Like, we have to stop this brain from this pacing and wearing wearing out the carpet. And so here's the thing where this really boils down to. Medication, literally Prozac for dogs, might be anywhere from 50 to $100 a month
Well,
just to give it to your dog, and you're suppressing the behavior. Some of them walk around like a zombie,
yeah,
but I will tell you, it's cheaper than bringing me in for a lesson.
yeah,
So what I can never compete with that, right? I can never compete with the financial part of how people deal with anxiety in their dogs. And so it's unfortunate. I mean, I can't make a living off $50 a lesson,
yeah.
you
But
know?
suppressing a behavior is not fixing the core of the behavior, right?
Nope.
It's a big negative. I'm very against it. You're really putting that dog in a straitjacket in some sense and just saying, stay in the corner. What's the point of
Yep.
having it? I feel like that people look at it differently. My view is, hey, you've kind of given up on that if you really haven't tried any other methods of
Yeah.
sure this dog's happy or gets what it needs. So
But I think it also goes back to the person that says, "Oh yeah, your dog is anxious. Here's a prescription for medication."
yeah, yeah.
Right? Rather than, okay, who are the 5 trainers in this area that, this might be, do your due diligence to figure out who might be the best fit for you. But this is one of those things when trainers get together, we talk about this stuff. It's just like, oh, it's like nails on a chalkboard to us because the majority of us can take care of this problem. And not only can we take care of this problem, but there's a good chance who we're working with is probably going to have a dog in the future. So
Yeah.
you're paying for all the training from here and all your other dogs in the future too.
Yeah, and your
Right?
children's dogs, like they learn
Totally.
from the behavior. It's crazy, and I see it with kids too, even in our schools where this kid's a little excited, and then they put him on something, and it's like
Yep.
you didn't try any other alternatives.
Yes.
So it's nuts. I think it's an easy way out, but I don't think it works long term. So I agree with you. I think you need to know why it's happening, not, hey, take this and, be quiet.
Call me in the morning.
Yeah, call me in the morning.
Yeah.
Let's talk about dog diets. There's processed foods that are now being distributed. There's also organic type food. Dog diets, is it super essential? What do you recommend to your clients for a good balanced dog diet? Should they be giving like natural food, or is kibble bits okay, or et cetera?
I think the first thing I tell people is it just depends on your wallet, number one, because you could have a 20-pound dog and you could spend $300 a month if you want to on a high quality raw dog food that's fantastic. You could also spend $30 a month for just some absolute garbage that's out there for your dog as well. So this is a rabbit hole as far as like for somebody that wants to research, raw food for their diets or for their dogs or something in between a kibble and a raw food. I think, from everything that I'm not a nutrition expert by any means, everything that I've learned and I've studied is, variety is super important. So, do your research and just find out what vegetables are good for your dogs. Not that you have to give, just kale to your dogs for every meal. It's not legit, but just add in something, add in a few carrots, add in, some pumpkin, add in some bananas. Eggs are good for your dog. Plain Greek yogurt is good for your dog, but it's important to understand the balance to it too. I remember in the early mid 2000s there were some massive pet food recalls like dry dog food kibble, and I really think that spurred this huge movement for dog food, which is amazing. We needed it, by the way, right? Because I would shudder to think what was in our dog's food when I was a kid. That was, I mean, it was bad. I think there was probably horse meat and roadkill and all sorts of bad things that were in it. And, to this day, you can find some, prime organic grass-fed beef for your dog kind of thing. And so it's amazing. It truly is. But understanding a dog's nutrition is essential, especially with, a drier climate compared, with skin and that kind of thing, to knowing how your dog's going to thrive. Allergies are a big thing with dogs these days too.
Yeah.
I think the majority of that is been brought on by the
All
ingredients in
this food in the food.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And
I
so
do.
you have to, unfortunately, there's just no easy answer. You just have to know, you have to do your research. But I always tell people, like, if you have a smaller dog, if you're in the, 5 to 20 pound range, you can get on a really good raw food diet with that dog and it won't break the bank. And
I
so,
agree.
yeah, I think people can do that. Now, if you have three 150-pound dogs,
Yeah.
I mean, you might as well buy a second house. You're going to be putting a mortgage into those dogs every month if you want to do something, with their food. So I think
True.
there has to be a balance to it and understanding what's best for your dog.
You know what? It goes back to that business plan we talked about getting a dog in the first place. I mean, that's a big thing. If you're going to get a
Yes,
big dog, prepare to pay a big price to feed it and clean up and everything
yep,
is amplified.
and vet it.
Yeah, you got to get a bigger car, and
Yes,
a lot of things. I used to boil for my dog boiled chicken and some veggies, and
yep,
it wasn't too expensive back then. It seemed to fix its code, or the dog's code, I should say.
yep.
But yeah, that's interesting. All right, let's talk a little bit about being a dog trainer in the dog business alone. You mentioned earlier, hey, I'm getting beat out by this a Zoloft or whatever.
Yeah,
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 which is not fair, but and I'm against it. So I think they're much better hiring someone like you and investing in their dog and their future than masking it for the rest of their dog's life, which the
yep.
kidney won't process or whatever, and so forth. Uh, so, dog business, is it a big business? Is it, what does the typical dog trainer make in a spectrum out there? And obviously it depends where you live, and not everyone's
Yeah,
in Milan, where,
right, right.
so what can, is it a good business to jump into?
Yeah, I think, so I first got into it, I opened the business out of my house. My wife and I fenced in our backyard. Daycare dogs came, we were going to board dogs in our basement. I quickly learned what dogs to take at night, overnight, and what dogs not, with the barking and whatnot. And, I remember we had our daughter there while I was boarding dogs. And so the whole thing, I did it 6 years out of my home before I moved into a facility for a little over 10 years, and really got going with daycare and boarding and training then. So I would say for me in rural Vermont, we only have about 25,000 people in our county. So there's not a lot of people around. So for me, I was kind of like, God, is this going to work? I mean, I love working with dogs and I love learning and walking them and hanging out with them and how they communicate. But going from there, I truly used to just watch dog whisper episodes on mute so I could watch the body language of the dogs without hearing what was going on. I just wanted to study the body language over and over and over again. So I had no idea that there are actually like Facebook pages for dog trainers to, where they would talk to each other, or there were email lists back in the day. I had no idea. And so when I first went to that workshop, one of Cesar's workshop in 2014, that was like a humongous gate opened up for contacts and people to talk to. And I attended a couple other workshops. You start to see the same names, over and over again. You start to chat with the same people. And so the network grows, the people you look up to, you get to chat with and you learn from them, right? And you pass on your information and such. And so I think there's a big gap between obviously like the Cesar Millans of the world compared to somebody that's just starting out brand new. And I mean, I think there probably is with doctors and lawyers too, as well. We all have our own spectrum, but I think it can be a lonely road. I will say this. The dog training industry is not one that's regulated as far as like how you have to train and what tools you can and can't use. And so
Interesting why it's not, and in some sense, right?
in some sense, yes. I feel like there needs to be something, but I also feel like we're, fair to say, Simon, you and I grew up very differently.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you deem is right and what I deem is right, we're probably going to have some things in common when we work with a dog. We're going to have some things where we're kind of like, I don't know if I actually care for how they're doing that. To me, at the end of the day, as long as we're not hurting the dog, we're not causing pain, we're not using intimidation, we're not doing any of that, then I feel like there's many things that can fit underneath that umbrella. I think if we're forced into only one way, I think we're disregarding the dogs. I've got two kids that are completely different in school. Like you can't, to me, it wouldn't make sense to use the same exact avenue to teach each one. Some kids want to go to a tech center and learn how to work on cars, and others want to, just study numbers all day. Nobody's wrong. It's just what their strength is. And so that's where I feel like there's beauty and creativity in this job too, where it's just like, I mean, I can remember, when I ran a daycare, it was 20 or 30 dogs, and I've got a dog in for the day that I'm evaluating, and this thing is, blowing off here at all the other dogs, and it stops for a second, and I get this vibe that goes, I just need to walk into the whole pack right here, right now, like, and you walk in there, and everything just kind of goes, ooh, and you're like, I don't know why, I just felt it, like, and so I feel like if we're being told how to do it one way, we take away that creativity and that being in the moment with a dog and understanding who they are and how they work. So that to me, I love that creativity. Probably why I loved it in golf too, because you can create different shots and work your way around the course. So it can be lonely at times, but it can be super rewarding too.
Yeah, very interesting you said that, because obviously it kind of goes back to kids as well. There's no one formula. There's no one formula to the body or the genetics and the predisposition of the genetics of the dog and the history. So, I agree. It gives you an opportunity to really understand what this dog is about, or solve a problem in that way, in a creative way. There's a saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. If everybody's heard this saying, is
Sure.
that true, or old dogs can learn something too?
I have to tell you, I think the person that created that phrase was not a patient person, because you can, but the thing to remember and why it was created is, if you have a 10-year-old dog that's been doing the same thing a certain way at a certain intensity level for 10 years, it's going to take a little time to work through that. That's a long time to be doing the same thing. The flip side is, you can take a 3-year-old dog who's been misbehaving at a super intense level for the last 3 years. That's going to take a while to undo as well. And so so you're like the second, I think you're like the third person in the last week that's asked me this question. So I have to, so we had this dog come in one time when I had a facility. He was 11 years old. He'd never been around other dogs before. So he was not social, but when he saw a dog, he would pop off. Like it was like no tomorrow. And so the more I worked with him, and I reached out to a couple or another trainer, and they said it's because he actually hasn't been around dogs. That's why it's manifesting in that way. So just take it slow. You'll see it'll wash away. It'll literally, like, once he gets used to being around them, not in the sense of I have to put up with this, but in the sense of this is actually natural to me, it'll work. And so sure enough, it was like day 2. This dog was like, oh, this is it? Yeah, I can do this. I know how to be around other dogs. And he was good. I mean, that's a 10-year-old dog that you just taught something brand new to. And so some dogs can just let it go. Other dogs take some more time, but you got to be patient with those dogs.
Be patient. That guy was not patient with that phrase. All right, what's your favorite dog movie? Do you have a favorite dog movie out there?
A favorite dog movie? Oh my gosh. I have to tell you, anytime I see my kids are like, hey, Dad, look at this dog on TikTok or whatever, I'm like, oh, stop. I can't look at this thing right now, because it's not. Everybody laughs at all these funny videos where the dog's baring its teeth, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so not good right now. I don't know if I actually have a favorite dog movie. I love animals and their behavior and whatnot. It just, when I see a dog movie, I can't look at it and appreciate it for what it is. I look at it and go, yeah, it's looking at it's looking at its trainer. It's getting signal to do a command or right now, right? Like I can see all that. So to me, it's so broken down that I probably can't enjoy it as much as an everyday dog owner could.
All right. I mean, yeah, that's pretty accurate, because you're used. It's almost like a teacher saying, no, this is not a good behavior that they're displaying. So now I'm not enjoying this film. That's funny.
Yeah.
All right. For me personally, Belgian Shepherds or German Shepherds, out of those two, what would you say is the dog to potentially? Which one do you like out of those two breeds?
So I just want to make sure. Do you mean Belgian Shepherd or Belgian Malinois and German Shepherd? Which I want to make, because there is both, but I just wanted to make sure.
You know what? I think it's the Belgian Malinois. I think.
Yeah, yeah. So to me, the Belgian Malinois are the Ferrari of dogs.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like it's you should know what you're doing. You should know what to expect. And like when I said before, if you don't get a working dog and not work it, these
Yeah.
dogs want to do everything with their mouth and they want to do it everything intensely. So I would never, once my daughter turns 16, I'm not going to hand her the keys to the Ferrari and tell her to go hit the highway.
I see. I see.
You know what I mean? That being
Not a
said,
first stop.
yeah, yeah. So that being said, they can be phenomenal dogs in the right hands. They can be amazing, right? You put me in an F1 race car, not good. You put an F1 driver in an F1 car, and it's like precision and it's beauty. You know what I mean? And so, were you asking like this is what you're considering
Well,
personally?
I did some research on both, and I found one doesn't shed as much as the other, and they're good
Uh,
guard dogs. They're good family dogs in some sense, but it sounds like they're more work than an average dog.
I mean,
Really,
if for me, I would lean towards more of a shepherd than the Malinois. I think you're looking at a couple levels down. Still have to work the dog, right? I mean that they're just bred to work. If you don't work them, that's when stuff starts to hit the fan. It starts to get a little ugly. Things are kind of going a little sideways, and so the worse that it gets, of course, there's more training, and the more training, the more expensive. So I love it when people reach out and they're like, so we're starting to see a couple little things. And I walk in, I'm like, man, you'd have your hands full in 2 years. This would not be good. You can see the trajectory that this dog is headed. And so
how,
getting ahead of that is good.
how often do you get hired and you go train the dog and it's successful training, and then the owner just goes back to their old ways and follow your routine, so to speak?
Yeah, you can only lead a horse to water, right? Like, um, I don't have an actual number, but there are times where I may run into that. We're a small county here, right? So you may see somebody down the road, and usually they're like, "Yeah, so and so still like this," and I'm going, "Yeah, I know, because you didn't do the work.
Yeah.
You didn't do the work while we were doing the lessons, so you're certainly not going to be doing the work now." So typically, I can tell. Like my lessons are to start with. I do 3 lessons 2 weeks apart. Lesson 1 2 weeks, and then lesson 2. So between the first and second week, I'm usually like, okay, did they do anything? If they did, we're on the right track. If they didn't, because maybe some life stuff happened, totally fine. Like that happened. Between, the second and third lesson, they haven't done anything. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
we're kind of getting to the point where we're wasting each other's time here. So, because I still to this day, I think there's those group of dog owners that feel like I'm going to hire a trainer. He's going to come in. He's going to do X, Y, and Z. Yep. Flip of the switch is done and we're good to go. And never does it work out that way.
I see. It's almost like there's no one secret sauce or formula to fixing the problem that you've created. You got to fix the problem yourself.
It always boils down to the relationship between the owner and dog. So if there is no relationship, there are not going to be any results.
Yeah. Very interesting. I completely agree. I mean, they're expecting you to make a miracle happen within a few hours and without wanting to do the work themselves. So
Yeah.
Go back to the business plan. You shouldn't have maybe got a dog.
Right. Exactly.
All right. As we wrap up here, I always ask guests, if you could go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice at any point in your life, what would that be and why?
So my one thing my mom told me as a kid, and I hated it as a kid. Today I understand it. She would always say lessons are repeated until they're learned. And so I've looked back at some things in my life where I try to do the same thing that over and over again. It's not working, and it's kind of like, why am I wasting my energy on this? And there's other times where it just seems like everything gets flipped on its head. Your life is crumbling around you. So I think going back and telling myself like, there's probably something why this is happening. You're going to get through it, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. But I mean, we are who we are because we pushed through things. We're not here, we're not here because we've just sailed easily through life without any tests or challenges or whatnot. So I think understanding that those times are going to come, and it's really, I coach kids, basketball, baseball, whatnot. I always tell them, like, you know, whether you make the shot or miss the shot, that doesn't define you. It's how you handle your wins and losses. And so, and I say the same thing about grades. I'm like, your grades don't define you either. Like, they just don't. But how you handle adversity, how you handle the ups and the downs, that's truly what defines you. So I feel like a little of that probably to me as a kid, I think would have helped me tremendously.
Yeah, great advice. Life's about wins and losses, and no one wins all the time, and no one actually loses all the time. So you got to
Yep.
figure out the thin line between it. Ian Grant, everybody, will link all your information below. Vermont dog trainer, really cool Instagram, which you grew pretty substantially. Congratulations, and I'm sure it's
Thank you.
this.
Yes, that it is.
So thanks for coming out on the Ideal Hour. I truly appreciate it, and I hope you had a good time.
Thank you, Simon. Had a great time. Really appreciate it.